Hello and welcome to the Society with Barrister Fatma Shaheen at PTB World. Now, when you hear the word disabled, the first thing that probably comes to your mind is somebody who can't talk, somebody who can't walk, somebody who can't hear, or for that matter, somebody who can't see. A lot of times we overlook the fact that disability is just not something which is overt. It can probably be something which is hidden as well. How have the definitions of disability changed over time? How have our perceptions, how have our attitudes, how has our mindset evolved, especially when it comes to dealing with differently abled persons? How can we empower such people in the society? And most importantly, what are the challenges that differently abled persons face in the society today? This and much more we are going to be talking about on our today's show. And to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Muhammad Ali, who is himself a visually impaired person, alongside being an activist. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much for having me.
You're most welcome. My second panelist for the show today is Ms. Maheen Gul Malik, who's the founder of Lahore Autism Center, alongside being a mother of an autistic child. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Fatma.
You're most welcome. And my third panelist for the show is Dr. Mamrez Naqshband, who is an orthopedic specialist surgeon at KEMU. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sahab, and welcome to the show. I would like to start the conversation with you, Muhammad. You know, when we talk something which I earlier referred to in my introduction as well, some disabilities are very overt, like, you know, yourself, we have an example of you here on the panel today, and some are very hidden. But when you delve into this more, there's this opinion is divided. Some people say that, you know, if you have a hidden disability, like if you have kind of a sleep disorder, or maybe you have some kind of a mental illness like depression or something, it's better to hide it rather than to declare it. Would you agree with that?
So I personally think that the problem with society at this juncture is the stigma that gets associated to even smaller or bigger things.
Right.
Whether the disability is overt or it's covert, that doesn't matter. What matters is the stigma. And to avoid that, people do this particular action. But in a very simple, simplistic sort of an analysis, I personally feel like if the state, the country, we all continue on this bandwagon, then this idea of people integrating will never be able to take place.
Basically, so you're of the school thought that even if you do have a hidden disability, it's best to declare it,
yes.
tell people about it, because, you know, inevitably one way or the other, it has that, you know, indirect effect of, you know, impacting your life too.
Yes, and I personally think that it'll manifest itself, and then it'll be very, the repercussions will be bad for you, the repercussions will be bad for people around you. We should, in one line, celebrate disability, not actually be afraid of pronouncing ourselves as people with disability.
Right, Muhammad, your point is noted. But coming to you, Maheen, we understand the fact that, you know, your son had autism and you diagnosed it at a very early age. It was a case of, I think, an ideal case of early intervention that way. So how did the diagnosis come about?
So basically, we realized that he was different from other children around him. I had placed him in a preschool very early on. So that was a plus point, because I saw other children, how they were responding to their mothers. For example, if I'd like to advise a mother of a young child who's different or neurologically different, I would say look out for certain things, which are they responding to their name? Are they tippy-toeing? That's a very
glaring
it's a trait
sign
of autism. If you tippy-toe, they're not looking into your eyes, or they're generally aloof from what's happening around them, or they're too tuned into a particular activity that it's difficult to...
And these traits have to be repetitive, from what I understand.
Of course.
Somebody can be shy, but they can just not be autistic.
No. Whether it's just a child being shy or having social anxiety, even, for example, that's another disorder. But autism is, I think it portrays
because I think
itself.
it's that one trait or, you know, series of traits which emanates in the different affairs of life, be it in, you know, school, or be it, and, you know...
Because you see, some autistic children are hyper.
Right.
Like hyperactive, they will not have any sitting span. So it's very difficult for them to go to school. So early intervention basically helps them understand the concept of sitting when other peers are sitting, and of listening to a teacher, and following general group commands, because otherwise you really have to focus and talk to the child.
Very right about Maheen, but I think a very important thing which we must highlight, and, you know, we'll get Dr. Saab's narrative on that as well, is the fact that when we talk about early intervention, I think the parent themselves also needs to be aware of it. That's the thing, because, you know, I have met quite a few parents who can't diagnose it until unless the child is actually a grown-up major that way too. So I think awareness is also the key here. Dr. Saab, would you like to add something to what she is saying?
Yes, obviously awareness And where mine is absolutely correct, there's, I don't think there's anyone else apart from the parents, you know, the first notice all of these aspects. But awareness from also from a societal perspective, I think that's what we need to cover as well.
Right.
Is schools need to be aware to look out for some, because not, you know, all children will be as close to their parents, or not all parents will be that switched on or tuned in as, you know, in certain cases. So that is
so awareness from a societal perspective, exactly, sir.
Yeah.
But coming to, you know, since you are the specialist here, the orthopedic surgeon on the panel today, so tell us, what is that level of, you know, orthopedic impairment, you know, which would qualify as a disability? Because I'm sure not every impairment per se would qualify as one.
What happens is that there is a aspect of either your muscles, your joints, or your bones causing a significant limitation to your everyday, we term it as ADL, so every daily limitation. So, and that is causing an impairment in your societal expectations or work function. In a case of a child, that also in development and their schooling and processes, so forth.
Right.
So
so again, it's just not one yardstick, you have to see it by
exactly.
different yardsticks.
It's a spectrum of things.
Right, right, sir. So what about the impairment? When you talk about impairment, what are the, you know, most common causes that you see here?
Mostly focusing on the locomotive orthopedic impairment.
Okay.
Main things are either, you broadly define them or differentiate them, either congenital, hereditary, or you know, present from birth or very straight, very soon afterwards. And the second way you categorize them, the second group is acquired. So in the first one, you're looking more at these, talked about autism briefly, but other certain locomotor impairment, the most common being cerebral palsy,
Right.
other things like club feet, hip dysplasias, post-sequela polio and other infections.
Right.
And if you're looking at the other spectrum, that's for older people with impairments, it's trauma. So the most common in Pakistan is motorbike accidents. Road traffic accidents, most common impairment is motorbike accidents.
Right, right. So I think the trauma bit I'll pick on, but before that I'll go to basically Mohammed. Mohammed, I think we've generally been talking about the definitions of disability. Doc Saab gave his own orthopedic, you know, surgeon narrative on that, and from Maheen we learned about autism that way. But I think it's only fair that we must also talk about the challenges here. Because that is something which is very pressing today, and since the show is about the society, I think we should keep the, you know, discussion focused that way. So challenges, I know you've studied here and then you also went to the States, you studied there, and you've been working in Pakistan for quite some time now. You're basically giving back to the society, which is, you know, generally very commendable. So what are the challenges which you face, you know, whether it's in terms of societal attitudes, whether, you know, it's not being able to access public spaces?
Particularly speaking, if I refer to the Pakistani context, I think the main problem with the Pakistani context is a lack of legislation. So let's compare the constitutions of the US and Pakistan.
Right.
Let's talk about the ADA and how elaborate the ADA is. It goes into the different spectrums of disability. What do we have? A 1985 constitutional amendment in the Balochistan Assembly says you need to help people with disability because God says that. It is a great thing, it's a great starting point, because obviously your state has taken certain actions in the past, but I think we need to continue, build upon those particular actions. We have a solid foundation, there's no denying that particular fact. The second thing that I need to talk about over here is, like, people in Pakistan, and I mean this when I say this, are amazing. If you go on the street and you ask for help, they'll be more helping than anywhere else, and the state will try its level best. But I think the main idea that needs to be brought in terms of evaluating challenges is, like, we're a developing country, so obviously there's a lack of ramps, there's a lack of footpath development so you can walk alongside the pavement. There are so many things in the infrastructure.
In the transportation issues, and I think the hospitals as well, from which we get Doc Saab's narrative too. But I think the best thing now is this, and this is a trend that I generally see emerging, that, you know, like you earlier said, it's very important for, you know, differently abled persons to advocate for their own rights. And that's a trend that we do see happening now in Pakistan. Recently, a petition was filed in the Lahore High Court where we understand that, you know, disability rights activists actually managed to get ramps, you know, made in the court itself. So I think these are the positive things that we need to highlight as well. And then we also have the Pakistan's first female civil servant who's visually impaired. We have Saima Salim. So I think it's also good that we should look at these practical examples. But coming back to my question, personally, I feel that, it's more about the societal attitudes. Even if you do get these access to public spaces, you do get to assistive technologies, I think the attitudes are something which need to change. Do you agree?
I think yes, to a certain extent, but I think the attitude changes with policy making.
Right.
Both of these things have a mutually exclusive relationship. You cannot just expect the attitude to change in a vacuum. I think the improvement that can happen is the awareness campaigns that are launched and the activity of inclusivity.
I think those are the two very important things, inclusivity and inclusivity through awareness. Maheen, would you want to elaborate on that? Because I know you have a lot to say on this.
Yes, of course. I'd just like to highlight what Muhammad Ali said about families accepting, etc. You also mentioned that denial is a major issue. Societal acceptance also requires that you accept a particular thing, and similarly suppressing who your child is. So unless you tell what your difference is, you can't get what you need to address the issue.
Of course, and Maheen, I think there's a different, perspective to look at it is also that, you're not disabled, so to speak, you're differently abled. And this is something which I think he earlier mentioned too, through the court judgment. That's something that has been reiterated again and again. But when we are talking about challenges, I think awareness, inclusivity, of course, there's no two ways about it. What are the challenges that you felt, you had to go through when
as a mother?
As a mother, yes.
To be very honest, personally, no challenges, because from day one, we were so open about Feroz.
But I think you are the exception that way, because this is like the exception to the general rule. A lot of people would hide this.
We told everyone, and now Feroz has his own Facebook page, where I highlight whatever he's doing, etc. And I feel that people who hide, yes, they do go through challenges. My challenge basically was that Pakistan did not have anything to offer, and because, as I said earlier, we were in Dubai for his initial therapy. When we came back, I enrolled him at a mainstream school here. He was there for 4 years. Lovely place, very loving, they're very accepting, but they just did not know what to do.
People don't even accept it as an issue. I think there's too much dismissal of it, and it's, even if it is accepted, they categorize it as being, mentally retarded. Okay, sorry to say.
No, intellectual disability, now we call it. But you're absolutely right, families, and because you see, because of Lahore Autism Center, now families come to me. And I guess I am, because he's 11 now, so I've had that experience, and they quote their families not accepting and being dismissive.
Exactly.
So that is where the problem comes in, and generally it's mothers who, especially if they're in joint families, they have major issues, because the mother-in-law, for example, will say that you didn't give him time, you don't talk to him, you have given him a tablet, for example. But you see, what I want to tell young mothers is that you do not cause autism.
Of course.
A human being cannot cause something that is genetic.
I think there are so many presumptions, not only about autism, I think about different kinds of disabilities which need to be set straight. The record needs to be set.
Guilt that mothers feel, that needs to be addressed.
Right, Maheen, your point is noted. Dr. Saab, you wanted to add something to this?
Just that social stigma here, I think we don't get it in a lot of other countries, that I've had the experience of, that you have the in-laws involved, you have such a big family structure, and then I cannot imagine, how hard it is for parents to get that diagnosis, and then not getting that affection, especially in particular with your autism, the social interaction that you crave for as a parent and things. And then on top of that being, stigmatized for that as well, that you didn't give him enough time or anything. So I think this thing really needs to be...
Really needs to change. So what are the experiences that you've had as an orthopedic, surgeon? Because I'm sure a lot of people with disabilities come to you too, and you are in that very important position where I think you not only have to, treat them, but there's so many things which are, emanating from their health, like psychological repercussions, depression, so many other things. So how do you go about that?
So it's, number one is to identify, a lot of these, in Pakistan, a lot of the disabilities, and if you're talking more about the sort of psychological aspects.
I'm talking about all kinds of disabilities, including, of course, the psychological.
So if you talk about the psychology, you need to be able to differentiate what the main issue is, so get a broad spectrum. That's what our training does, is to get an idea of where their diagnoses lie, and then you deal with them appropriately, whether they're intellectually impaired or they have other spectrum issues. So then from a physical standpoint, obviously, it's very, I deal with, for our hospital deals with more the physical locomotor disability aspects, and that has many challenges. Like number one is the infrastructure that Mohammed Ali was talking about. Afterwards, people just don't have enough. If you start from the top, the acute services, you know, if you have someone has an acute disability, the provision of care, you know, able to salvage a limb or not, that. So if you end up having a disability like you know, the leg doesn't work as well, or the arm has to be amputated or something, then the care afterwards it's needs a lot of improvement, and that involves an MDT, like a multidisciplinary.
And also, I also think it's very expensive at the end of the day.
Very much.
Very expensive. So again, I think accessibility is something that we need to work on, whether it's, you know, in the case of a disability which is overt, or for that matter of any kind. Mohammed, you want to add something to that?
Two things. I think let's not, at the end of the day, very critically analyze our state or our people. Two reasons: because we are a developing country, we have budgetary constraints. We need to look at Pakistan when we look at because I also suffer from lack of accessibility and problems of that sort. But we cannot evaluate and compare Pakistan to developed nations because we have budgetary constraints, we have other problems. Let's analyze our country from the limitations that it's working out for its people. And I think in comparison to that particular idea, our state is doing a job better than it could have, because the amount of judgments that are being coming out, the amount of like affirmative action policies that are being implemented within society.
Nobody is denying that, Mohammed, but we are, you know, given the
We're
fact that
looking
he,
at what it
from
is.
a reformatory kind of a viewpoint, and of course he has that benefit
on the floor,
of,
if you look at what's, you know, on the ground situation, it needs dramatic overhaul, and then the thought process, number one, you know, they still are equal members of our society. They have the equal rights, more rights than we should have. They should have
equal rights as per the constitution. They fall within the definition of citizens, and of course like anybody else. But Dr. Saab, coming back to you, I think a very important thing which we must address is also the fact that I'm sure that not every patient who comes to you, you have to operate on them. So like, what is the yardstick? Because this is a general, you know, misconception in the Pakistani society, which I would want you to clarify since you're here on the show, that, you know, most surgeons just operate for the sake of, you know, doing this operation.
Well, this is a perception.
Right.
This is not the case in, you know, overwhelming majority of situations with surgeons. They are trained on we term it as a Hippocratic oath, which surgery is the last resort, you know, for any. But a lot of people that come to us need surgery. Predominantly the people that come to me do not require surgery. But if it is in the end, it's about non-maleficence. So do no harm to the patient that comes your way. So
that's the test to determine whether somebody needs surgery or not.
So if the risks, you know, outweigh the potential benefits, you do not operate, and you know, try to manage the conservatively. But if you know that there is no other way, you know, someone comes in with a broken leg or something, you need to do something about it. So that's
right. So of course, then again, it's a very individualistic kind of a decision that you need to make.
Here, just there's a lot of culture of people not even seeking, you know, proper medical treatment. A lot of people from my field, end up going to quacks or jarrahs and things like that. And they end up, when they come to us, it's very, you know, that's my experience with the public. They end up with the last resort, and you're sort of left with.
So how do you deal with those cases? The doctors like yourself, orthopedic doctors, they do have a very important standing here.
We have, yes. So you will be surprised how many people end up just going to local Hakeems or Jarrahs still. You know, it's unbelievable what I've noticed since I've been back here.
And you're talking about Lahore.
I'm talking about Lahore, exactly. So when they come to us, it's like they cannot, you know, it's been 6 months, they've been managed in some special oils and things, it hasn't worked. So they come to us and the bone's already gone or whatever. We have very limited options then. So
that is the time you choose to actually do operate.
Yeah,
of course, when you have no other option that way, generally.
Some of the things you could have managed with, for instance, just casting or conservative management, but you know, follow-ups, that you end up doing operations for things that get more complicated, out of hand afterwards.
Right, so your point is noted. But coming to you, Mohammed, I think we should also talk about, you know, the language we use to refer to differently abled persons. And like you yourself earlier mentioned, that there have been, you know, judgments which have regulated the contours of that, to saying that particularly that, you know, you can't use words like physically handicapped or mentally retarded, so to speak. But in practice, do you see these things being implemented?
Okay, so there are two things that I would like to say over here. I think semantics or aesthetics do play a role for reforming society, but it has a limitation. I think the problem is not with the term. The problem is with the repercussions that those terms have. For example, if you call me a blind boy or a blind person, I would not mind it. but like the negative repercussions that are attached to blindness in our society, which is generally beggary, which is like sociological things like you being lower in the hierarchy of the society.
So since you are, talking about this, what are the words you feel should not be used? Because I think your narrative on this is extremely important.
Okay, so firstly, I think that I would not mind being identified by my disability, because I think I would disagree with you there.
Okay.
It's a very important part of my identity, and if somebody calls me as a disabled person, I would not mind it.
Okay.
When does a term gets bad or negative
I think when it
repercussions?
supersedes the personality itself, the individual.
If you would not call me as a blind person or not label my disability, that stigma around my disability will never be able to dissipate. This is a big part of our identity, and there should be no negative repercussion that is attached to it. If there is a requirement of sociological change, people accept me for who I am, and that disability, my identity in relation to that disability, should be celebrated in society, not be negatively looked at.
Right, Mohammed, but I also think that maybe, you have this opinion, but I have had the, chance to meet many other people who are differently able, and they might not agree with you that way, especially if they do have a hidden disability and they wouldn't want to, declare it. So I think, again, even for women who are differently abled, they would want to hide it for so many societal reasons at the end of the day. So I think you are that one brave exception to the general rule that way, to which you would want to add something?
Yes, please, because you see, when you say that they would want to hide it, we are the voices who can make that change.
Right,
because people generally share a meme saying, autism doesn't define my child. And I find offense, I take offense to that meme, because autism is being shown in a negative light by saying that it does not define my child. It does.
Of course.
He
That is
is
exactly what I was saying.
neurotypical,
Right.
he is autistic. This is how you have to look at it. These are two differently wired brains.
Right.
Mine is NT and his is autistic. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so I agree.
I think it's a matter of perception at the end of the day, Maheen.
But we have to keep raising awareness and acceptance as a result.
As you particularly said that people have these perceptions within their minds, I think that if we look at history, the 17th or the 18th century, the people had a mindset of being slaves, the African Americans. They were not ready to raise voices for themselves because the society, through socialization, through coercion, had made them believe that that was their place in society. And that is the problem with people with disability. The society has shackled them, and they have thought that their resort is to hide from society, and that way their problems will be salvaged and solved, which is like a short-term lens of looking at stuff. If you want a sustainable solution, you need to be proud of your disability and celebrate it, in my opinion.
Right, so basically. And I think in this regard, we should also consider the fact that this is something personally that I find very flawed when I look at the society largely. You either categorize people in that charity model, people who are differently abled, having that feeling of pity on them, which they really don't want, or in that typical medical model, which of course isn't factually correct, because not every disability needs a cure or a treatment. So what do you feel can be that one ideal societal, model in which we can put them?
There's no ideal model, you see, because again, it'll take years or centuries, I don't know, to bring about that change. But the ideal model would be that live and let live. But going back to affirmative action, for example, that if somebody does need that additional help or somebody does need that additional input.
Dr. Saab, what role can, healthcare professionals like yourself play when we talk about inclusivity, including, disabled persons in the society?
Number one, we need to be well trained for dealing with people with disability and having more knowledge. Going through school, I was thinking this is such an interesting discussion. There were people we never even thought about. I think all my years at school, they were never talked about. We didn't have any education on them. And then going through medical school as well, it's a limited one that we do. So number one is, and the doctors in a way are leaders in getting together a team of individuals, because it's not just the doctors who do that, it's a multi
it's
health
a system,
discipline. So training is the main thing. Training occupational therapists is very weak in Pakistan. Training of specific physiotherapists, not general ones, but the ones that deal with specific disability like neuromuscular or other issues, cognitive issues. And then coming together from that perspective, if they are certain disabilities that require surgery or assisted devices afterwards, having spending more an infrastructure of orthotic devices and and so forth as well.
Right. And I think inclusivity here, I think the things that you have listed, they are very apt in themselves. And we talk about inclusivity, I think we should also consider the rural areas of Pakistan where, you know, so many other issues do occur. Like we have seen a lot of doctors, you know, stepping in and actually endorsing all these polio vaccination drives. So maybe we should have more of such mobilizations of doctors. I was reading this very interesting article in which this Syrian doctor who himself suffered from polio, he said that, you know, because I myself was a target of it, so I'm now going to actually study medicine and I'm going to help the world, you know, eradicate this very evil. So I think in that way, doctors like yourself, they have a very important social responsibility to give to the society too.
Absolutely. I think the doctors, the other thing is having special seats, increasing the number of seats for disabled people in medical schools, for instance.
Right.
If they see themselves in that situation and others can look up to and also aspire to do the same. So, so that would be one thing they could look into.
Right, and I think in this regard we must also consider, you know, the counselling bit, because that is something which is very important, and of course that has a very important role to play when you treat a patient. So how does the counselling bit go? Because I think that is something which is a very big challenge, not only to the patient but to the doctor as well.
Yes, very true. So main thing about counselling is, number one, starting with adequate communication and an informed consent process, as we term it. So the patient, their family, and people close to them need to be all involved. The doctor, the rest of the nursing staff, whoever's been involved in their care, need to be involved in having. So we start up with a meeting, usually, and everyone, you know, puts in their specialist input, and then you come up with a counselling process. There's a grieving process with that as well.
Of course.
If it's happened. So then you have to look into getting psychology input and various other medication starters as needed. But there is a whole, you know, and
I think it's a team of doctors which have to come together and work on this, because I think it's then too much responsibility on one particular doctor and one particular specialization, because it's so all-encompassing.
And afterwards as well, they need to have a follow-up. A lot of these patients with grieving with disability can go into post-traumatic stress as well, PTSD, which is real and quite prevalent in this. So you need to keep an eye on that and monitor them. There also needs to be a ray of hope as well. So you need to connect them to appropriate organized. This is an excellent one, like the autism one for a different purpose, but other ones like prosthetic limb centers and, you know, people with disabilities due to amputation. In other words, there are other societies.
And I think the most important thing is that the doctor needs to have the right empathy, compassion towards the doctors. A lot of patients I've seen, they complain that, you know, the doctors are not that compassionate and they are not that empathetic, especially, you know, when one fine day you get diagnosed with some kind of a disability. So I think that is something that doctors like yourself need to work on as well. Mohammed, coming to you, I think we've been talking about the barriers, and I think one of the things which Maheen earlier, you know, picked on, and I would want your narrative on this because we understand that you've been through this process, is the stigma that comes from the family. We've been talking about the social stigma, the stigma that comes from the society, but what about the stigma that comes from the family?
I think that's a big prevalent thing, and I think people who are very educated, who've gone to elite schools and stuff, still believe and don't do that particular thing. I myself was a victim of this particular stigma. Me and my sister both were born visually impaired. Our parents got divorced because of this. And I don't want to go into that story, it's pretty detailed, but I think the main takeaway from this is that because of the perception about these people that society has created, there's a lot of barriers that you have to face from your family. And I think it's not limited to like one member of your family.
Of course it
like
can
I
be.
remember my grandmother used to say to me, like, if you don't get eyes, how will you like do anything in this world? And I remember like whenever I used to go out with my driver once in my childhood, like they were out of empathy. They used to say to me, are you like, how do you study? And all of these people have these many questions to ask from you. So I think that like as a person, you need to actually like take motivation from people that are actually supportive. Like my grandfather, my mother's mother, like my grandmother from my mother's side, my mother, like a lot of my support staff, my teacher, Mrs. Salim, Sarwasif, a lot of people.
Right, Mohammed, and I think this is something, of course, which is a very glaring and pressing issue, something which, you know, Ms. Maheen also earlier pointed out. But what is the solution? What is the way forward? How do we tackle this?
I think societally, I think there should be more counseling of parents and like of family members that are immediate to these particular people. They should be, especially in terms of like the physical realm of disability, they
Right.
should be aware of how they can be productive members of society. We also have our own examples.
Exactly.
In Pakistan, which should be highlighted. Like you talked about Saima Salim earlier.
Right.
There is this Shevering scholar earlier that did her, I am forgetting her name, but she did her.
We have Pakistan's first blind civil judge.
Yes, Justice Yusuf Salim is his name.
Right.
So there are a lot of examples that we can take from Pakistan as well, and I think those should be like brought into the mainstream more.
Right, Mohammed, and coming to, I think in this regard, it's also very important, since he has mentioned media, that we need to have more of such conversations and uncomfortable conversations where we are talking about, rights of differently abled persons. So what is, that one mechanism through which media can penetrate and, keep on talking about such issues? Because I think it's just not the lack of talking, it's also that sustainability in the talk, because something happens, you talk about it, then something happens, you talk about it. It has to be a consistent momentum.
I think only somebody who is personally going through something, they are the ones who remain consistent.
Right.
So, I mean, my friends, all of us who have children who are neurologically different, we are very, very vocal, and we are constantly trying to bring about the change. And for the society also, as you were mentioning, and familial change, we keep trying to raise awareness, we keep trying to portray our children in a very positive light.
So I think you're very right in that these are the things that we need to talk about, and we need to get out of our comfort zone and talk about the issues that actually do matter. But how precisely do you feel can mainstream media do that?
Basically, I've seen many serials here in Pakistan where anyone who's negative or is evil is blessed with a differently abled child. So basically what they're portraying is that it is a result of your sins that you have a child who is different. So that needs to stop. And writers also need to stop writing such plays where it shows that this is a very negative thing that has happened to you. So, and as you mentioned, that they are not shown in a positive light. So, going back to Muhammad Ali's point that, beggary is associated with it, etc. So, this is what happens even in our serials. They show that these children, they are suffering, they are not going to school, families are shunning them. So,
the narrative needs to change, basically.
Absolutely.
I think it's just not the lack of screen space, it's the kind of content that you're producing and the kind of narrative that you're putting forward.
And one other thing, I feel that children with autistic children are underrepresented in that way. That when you talk about disability, the overt disabilities, as you were mentioning, those are there. Still you get to see that, but you don't see a child who is
suffering from depression or sleep disorder, something which is not so overt, that's hidden. Which is exactly why I raised this, basically, because we need to, see this whole thing in a complete dimension. Dr. Saab, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, just the whole ethos, as you said, the perception, having more people with disability should be in more positive limelight, like Muhammad Ali was also saying, have some role models, make it more accepting in that way. And also you hear a lot of more, and rightly so, about harassment, and on radio shows, on TV advertisements and so forth.
Harassment, acid attacks, honor killings, so many social issues.
You hear about them and you see them, and there's a, they are highlighted, I think, currently more than even I was thinking, I don't even know what the ministry which they're under and who to contact and things like that you hear a lot about other things. But people with disability there should be a port of contact, know which centers to go to, be more informed, and the society on the whole then becomes more informed. They actually, visual impairment, we've got a center up here, and these are things that we need to do to make things a bit easier.
Dr. we must also talk about so many myths which do come with disability per se. So what are the most common and annoying myths that you come across which you would want to address on the TV show today, basically spell them out and completely debunk them?
So firstly, if someone's had a significant injury to the leg, they're never going to walk again, or they'll be a cripple for life, or they'll be on a bed and not be productive at all. But things have changed, science has changed, we have more, we can do a lot more for you now, for the patients, to help them get back to their pre-morbid function. So that's not everyone who has an accident or has a leg fracture cannot walk, or
Of course.
but there's a lot of avenues that we can look into to get them back to work and so forth. Others in women that if they have a significant injury, they will not be able to bear children or have issues in that area. That's also predominantly has
That's very outdated now.
very outdated. It has no science behind that. There's no real medical reasons for these sort of things that need to be addressed, and also a stigma there.
Right, and I'm sure you do also have a lot of success stories coming to you, people who you've treated and they've managed to come out of the disability.
Absolutely, and that is the most rewarding part of our job, to see people come in, in a bad way, and then you see them a few months after and they're doing very well.
So tell us about one such story, the one which was most impactful for you.
Oh, yes, there's many stories. I think one is the TOCA injuries in Pakistan needs to be. There's another aspect. Now we have mechanized TOCA machines in Pakistan, and hand amputations are very common.
Okay.
So we had a young person a few months back with, he had almost complete amputation of his arm because of the TOCA injury. We got him back to. It's always very sad with children to see these sort of things, and we got him back to a very good function after restoring and reimplanting his arm.
Okay. Right, so and coming to you and coming towards the conclusion of the show, Mohammed, I think we need to talk about the government's vision about differently abled persons, and we know that this government has launched the Sehat Sahulat program, in which they have been facilitating differently abled persons, giving them health insurance, and then we also see them promising the job quota as well. But earlier you also mentioned that there have been, not one, in fact, various court judgments which have gone, leaps and bounds to uphold the rights of differently abled persons. But what more do you feel needs to be done?
Okay, so first and foremost, yes, I agree with you. There have been a lot of initiatives, and obviously there needs to be done. There are a lot of things that need to be done within Pakistan. I think the main problem within our state, which like the root cause behind everything, is the lack of accessibility. It is. So on a disability card, you get so many discounts, you get so many facilities, but an average person in the state does not know how to get that disability card made. There are very less centers across Punjab where you can go and get that disability card made, which is a very small sort of a thing. But if you get it made, the life will be way more easier. Secondarily, I think, yes, there have been projects that have been done in terms of like giving out quotas to people with disability. I think that for the sustainability, arrangements should be made where these people should become productive members of society. So two suggestions. Firstly, I think as the state is very, fixated on like startups in Pakistan and the business activity, there should be proposals. Business should happen around this particular model. And I think I want to draw a comparative over here with MAN. It was a social enterprise set up within the United Arab Emirates and across the UK as well, where these particular people who had like opportunities and they created their own social enterprises. I think in terms of like, as we've all discussed, the three of us, and you've also added like valiant things in this, the problem is with perception, and there's like a lot of societal issues. So I think this should be taken more seriously. From the media, from the drama industry, people should be given roles that are more positive in nature.
And personally, I would want to, add to this. I think people like yourself, they need to be featured more too. We need to have your narrative as the stakeholder, like we have in so many other cases, be it in the case of transgenders, minorities. You need to be in those lead roles. You need to be seen. You need to be heard that way. Because I think looking at differently abled persons from the eyes of abled persons, that in itself is also an injustice, on which I would want you to give a message to everybody out there who is listening to this show today, that what message would you give to other differently abled persons like yourself out there?
Okay, so just finishing on the last thought, I think the main thing is to create discourse, and when a certain thing is pushed into the mainstream discourse, it is able to create change through organic mechanisms, and that should be done. This is a message that I gave at the end of my TED Talk and at a lot of other platforms. I would like to repeat it for people with disability and for people without disability who coexist in society together. It is, don't feel sorry that I can't see. Feel sorry what your ignorance is doing to millions, doing to me and millions like me. I thank you.
Thank you so much. And coming to you, I think it's also important that we talk about the policy per se. What more needs to be done at a policy level if we want to ensure that, you know, differently abled persons, they are made productive members of the society?
So the law that's going to be passed soon, hopefully, the People with the Disabilities Act, that does address a lot of issues that we have been speaking about, including employment.
Right.
So 3% employment, for example, in every private and public institution for the differently abled. I think if implemented, that's going to bring about a huge change. And they've also spoken about things like bullying, not in those terms, but you can't harass these people, and that there are special courts that are going to be made that you can take such a grievance to. So again, accessibility will improve with that.
Of course.
In addition,
and accessibility not only in one, you know, sphere of life, in so many spheres of life, which was never there before.
Which was never there. And all the constitutional rights that we are talking about, those are actually spelt in this act.
Right.
So it's going to be a huge change in accessibility and making sure that your rights are guaranteed.
Of course.
If it becomes an
and
act.
I think it's a very good thing that on part of the state, you know, they're putting it out in writing, because once you spell it out, as we do all understand, then, you know, there's some yardstick by which you can measure things, and you can make sure then that those things, they get, you know, practical implementation as well.
And even I'd like to mention the First Lady, the President's wife, Mrs. Amina Alvi. She's very interested in all this, and she is trying to bring about change.
Right.
She's keeping a tab on things that are being implemented, and she's asking people to give updates to her, which wasn't previously done.
Right.
So the state is doing what it can.
I think the society also needs to step in.
The society needs to step in, and I think people like us who have a voice, we shouldn't stay quiet.
Of course.
We are the ones who can make a difference. We are the ones who can raise awareness. We are the ones who can take these children or these individuals out into the public space. Claim public spaces. That's a hashtag that.
And I think they need to do it for themselves too, like he has been doing.
I mean, he
this,
can.
Of course.
You see,
he can. But there's so many others who can't, right? I think they need to be given that access and the right platform. And coming to you, Dr. Saab, what would your concluding message be? I think I would want you to comment about, you know, reform in the healthcare system such that it's made more accessible to people with different abilities.
Yeah, I completely agree that society needs to step in as well, which we're not doing. I think we can do a lot more of with the society that we have here. The government is cognizant of and is aware of, from a health perspective, of the shortcomings, and the issue is funding, number one, and lack of specialties and subspecializations. That is the main issue. And although you may have a drive, but it takes a while to get there.
And I think post COVID-19, you know, things have worsened as it is.
Because you're looking at other things. Exactly right. But we need the funding. We need to start from, you know, where the disability arises, especially if you consider the acute disabilities, amputation, other. You need to have a state-of-the-art trauma services, which we do not have. Have a trauma specialist centers like the cardiology centers and others we have. But we don't have a special trauma center as yet here in Punjab.
Right, sir. Your point is noted. On that note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you so much, Maheen. And thank you so much, Dr. Mamreez, for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the rights of disabled persons and the status and perceptions we give to such people in our society today. We also, you know, discussed various court judgments in this regard, which have gone leaps and bounds to protect the rights of differently abled persons, very categorically saying that you can't call them mentally retarded or, for that matter, physically handicapped. What does remain to be seen is, what does remain to be worked upon is the fact that we need to change our societal attitudes. We need to make them more empathetic. We need to make them more accepting in order to ensure that such judgments and such positive social developments are actually implemented in letter and in spirit. And for that, I feel that the differently able community does need to step up. They also need to be, you know, seen. They need to make sure that their voices are heard, and they need to understand the fact that just because, you know, they are disabled, that doesn't mean per se that they are disabled. Disability is, of course, or can be a different form of an ability. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.